The quiet of the evening was shattered by a sound no one could explain. A cry. Not loud, not long, but sharp. Too sharp. Like a baby. Then silence. The kind that makes the skin crawl. Villagers froze where they stood. Mothers clutched there. Children. Old men stopped mid-step. No one spoke. Then another cry. So soft it sounded like it was swallowed by the wind. But they heard it. Every single one of them heard it. Someone said, "This was no accident." Another whispered, "Someone threw her." No one denied it. Across the water a shadow moved, then vanished. No splash, no sound. Then by the water's edge they found her. A baby girl, wrapped in cloth, her small body lying still in the moonlight. Some gasped in disbelief. Others whispered prayers, crossing themselves, unsure of what they were witnessing. One by one, they knelt beside the child, touching her gently, as though afraid to disturb the fragile silence that hung around her. The river had given birth to her. But why? Where had she come from? How did she end up here? As they gathered around, an old woman stood at the river's edge, watching. Her figure was frail, her face covered in the shadows of night, but her eyes gleamed with an ancient wisdom. Without a word, she turned, and in the blink of an eye, disappeared into the dark woods behind them. The villagers froze. Her departure, so sudden and silent, left a lingering unease. Who was she? Was she part of this mystery? The air grew heavier, thick with questions that no one dared to ask aloud. The debate began almost immediately. Some of the villagers, eyes wide with awe, whispered that the river had sent the child as a blessing, a gift to their village, a symbol of hope. Others, more skeptical, feared the opposite. They muttered that the river could just as easily send a curse. "What if it's a test?" one elder asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "What if it's a warning?" said another, glancing nervously toward the waters. Fear began to mix with the excitement, and the village fell into chaos. Each person had an opinion, but no one had the answers. Amid the commotion, one person stood silent, watching from the edge of the crowd. She did not join in the conversation, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, took in every detail. She knew that this child, abandoned at the river's edge, could be the key to something greater, something far beyond what the villagers could understand. Her mind raced with possibilities. Power, beauty, influence. The river had given birth to this child for a reason, and she, of all people, would find out why. As the others debated, her thoughts were consumed by ambition. She had long dreamed of a life beyond the confines of this village, of wealth, of power. This mysterious child could be the answer. The river's secret, its gift or its curse, might be exactly what she needed to break free from the life she had known. She had seen how the villagers respected the river, how they feared it and prayed to it. If she could control this child, if she could understand the river's power, she would finally escape the life that kept her bound. This moment, this child was the key to everything. She looked at her reflection again, lips painted, head tied high, eyes full of fire. "I was not born for this small life," she whispered. "I will not stay here and die carrying firewood and gossip." Her feet moved fast. Her plans moved faster. People talked, but she didn't hear them. Her mind was already walking on red carpets, sitting beside kings, waving from balconies. She had seen women with nothing become women with everything. She believed she was next. "I will marry a man with power," she said. "I will wear gold, eat meat every day, and sleep on soft beds." The village girls laughed behind her back. "This one thinks her face is a passport," they said. But she didn't stop. She walked like a queen before she had a crown. Her eyes were always watching, always hunting. And then she saw him. Wealthy, feared, respected. She smiled to herself. Chief Oduma, yes, he is the door, and I have the key. Far from the noise, another woman sat by the river, hands in her lap, eyes on the water. She didn't wear makeup or bright clothes. Her beauty came from stillness. She had no children, but her heart was full. The river gives, she always said, and the river takes. Many thought she was strange. Others said she was wise. When people cried, they came to her. When the land was dry, she prayed to the river. Even after loss, she never cursed. She waited. She believed. Long ago, the young girl with dreams used to sit beside her. The older woman had taught her stories, songs, secrets about the river. Respect nature, speak gently, don't chase shadows, she used to say. The girl listened once, but that time was gone. The girl wanted gold, not grace. She wanted power, not peace. She stopped coming. She stopped greeting. She forgot. Now the girl had plans, big ones. She hid letters. She sneaked off at night. She met messengers in secret. She laughed at old promises. Let them say what they like. I will become great, she told herself. She no longer cared for the wisdom of her past. She was chasing something louder. Oduma is close, she whispered. Soon the whole village will kneel. But then the whispers began. Quiet at first. Strange stories about the river. A woman saw light floating on the water. A man heard voices under the moon. A child said the river talked his sleep. And someone, just once, said the river grants desires if the price is right. Her heart jumped. Could it be true? She asked. Could the river help me? She listened to the rumors like they were sweet music. She started watching the river again, not with love, but with hunger. If the river can give, I must take, she thought. Every splash, every ripple felt like a message. Come, the river seemed to say. Come and ask. She smiled. I will, soon, but deep inside, something pulled. A small voice whispered, This is not the way. She pushed it away. I have come too far. The river called, but so did her past. Her feet moved forward, but her heart looked back. Is this the right path? She wondered. Her hands held her dreams, but her shadow carried doubt. The drums of tradition beat in one ear. The song of ambition sang in the other. She stood between two worlds, unsure of which one would break her. The wedding was close, and the drums of celebration had already begun to whisper. Her face smiled for the village, but her heart did not dance. Gold touched her neck, fine wrappers, hugged her waist, but her chest was still empty. She stared at the gifts and whispered, This is not enough. She wanted more than titles, more than praise. I need something bigger, something no one can take from me. Her eyes turned to the river. The village was alive with talk. Women at the stream spoke in low tones. Men by the fire shared strange stories. They say the river grants desires, one said, but it asks for something in return, another added. She heard every word. Her ears burned with every whisper. Power, she said under her breath. If the river can help me, I'll give it anything it wants. Her hunger grew sharper than ever. She stopped listening to people. She only listened to the river now. One afternoon, she stood by the water, arms folded. The woman approached quietly. The river doesn't serve you, the woman said. It gives when it wants and takes when it pleases. There was no anger in her voice, only worry. Don't play with what you don't understand. The younger one turned her face away. You don't see what I see, she answered. You have waited your whole life and received nothing. I will not wait. The woman sighed and stepped back. Then you will pay. But the younger one was already walking away. She didn't sleep that night. Her mind raced. What does she know? She snapped. She wears rags and prays to silence. I wear silk and walk into destiny. She stared at her reflection and saw power. The river is old, but I am clever. I will take what I need and give what I must. Her hands trembled, but her heart was cold. She would not back down now. The moon was round when she returned. The water was still. From the mist, a figure stepped out. The woman wore white. Her eyes glowed like fireflies. You want something, she said. I do, came the reply. And you will give something, the woman said again. Yes, the voice answered. The woman reached into her cloth and pulled out a glowing bracelet. This will bind the deal. Wear it. But remember, the river remembers everything. The younger one took it without blinking. I'm ready. The woman vanished and the river rippled softly. Days passed. Her stomach grew round, but her heart grew heavy. This child is not a blessing, she said. It's a burden. She placed her hands on her belly. If I want a new life, I must let go of the old one. Her voice cracked, but her mind was strong. If I throw this child away, the river will clear my path. She stood tall, convinced. Sacrifice brings reward. He noticed the silence. He noticed her eyes. Where is my son? He asked. I need a son to carry my name. She smiled and kissed his hand. Soon, she said. But inside she clenched her fists. He grew restless. He paced. He asked again. You promised me a son. She nodded and rubbed her belly. He's coming, she lied. But her mind was already drifting to the river. She danced when he watched. She laughed when he entered. She spoke soft words and served hot food. Everything is fine, she said again and again. But deep inside, a secret burned like fire. No one could know, not him, not the villagers, not even the gods. Her secret was hidden in her smile, buried beneath fine clothes, wrapped in silence. And in that silence, a dark plan waited for the perfect moment. The drums beat louder, hands clapped, feet moved, voices rose in joy. The ceremony had begun. Everyone was waiting. The chief stood proud, his eyes shining. The woman beside him held, her stomach tight, pain on her face, sweat on her brow. This is it, she whispered. The people danced around them, praising the gods, praising the river. The child was coming, and the village held its breath. The midwives moved quickly. The chanting slowed. A cry broke through the air. The midwife lifted the child high. The cheer died in their throats. It's a girl, she said. Silence followed. The woman's eyes went wide. Her jaw clenched. No, she said. Check again. The midwife shook her head. It's a girl. A gasp escaped her lips. Her hands trembled. Her dream shattered in a single breath. She had promised a son. She turned her back. Her hands pushed the baby away. She's worthless, she shouted. The chief stared in shock. His mouth hung open, but no words came out. She didn't wait. She grabbed the baby and stormed out. Her steps were fast. Her eyes were wild. The people moved aside. No one dared to stop her. She headed straight for the river. She stood at the edge. Her voice cracked like thunder. Go back to the river where you came from. She raised the child high. The baby cried. Soft and new. She didn't look twice. Her arms moved. The baby flew through the air. Splash. The river opened and swallowed the child whole. The cloth floated for a moment, then sank. The water grew still. Her chest rose and fell. Her arms hung weak. The wind blew. Her eyes stared into the dark water. A cold grip wrapped around her heart. Something unseen, something strong. Her breath shortened. Her knees bent. What have I done? she whispered. The river said nothing, but it remembered. The next day, she walked slowly, her head low, her skin pale, voices whispered around her. She threw her own blood. The river knows. The gods will not forget. At night, she couldn't sleep. Whispers filled the air. Soft cries echoed in her ears. Mama! Mama! Her mirror stopped showing beauty. Her eyes became hollow. Her lips cracked. Her laughter died. Guilt danced in every shadow. The door flew open. The chief stood there, rage in his eyes. You promised me a son. She reached for him. Please, I can explain. He stepped back. You failed me. You failed everything. Her voice shook. I did it for us. He growled. You did it for yourself. He turned to leave. Wait, she cried. But he was gone. Her hands dropped. Her voice faded. He took his gold. He took his name. He took everything. The servants stopped bowing. The villagers stopped speaking. She stood in silence, alone, powerless, broken. She walked to the mirror. The face staring back was not hers. She touched her cheeks. What have I become? No one answered. Only the wind, only the river, and the silence. Her feet dragged through the dusty paths. Her lips cracked from thirst. Her eyes scanned every face, but none offered comfort. Why did I do it? She whispered. Why didn't I wait? She stopped old women, young boys, anyone who would pause. Have you seen the girl from the river? Some turned away. Some shook their heads. One pointed but said nothing. Her voice grew weak, but her search did not stop. By the river, a quiet figure plucked weeds gently. The broken one stumbled forward, hands trembling. Please, she begged. Please forgive me. The older one didn't turn. You should have listened. The voice was calm. I warned you. The river is not a toy. The beggar dropped to her knees. I was wrong. Please, help me. The woman finally turned. Her eyes were sad but firm. The river holds power, she said, but also memory. It heals, but it punishes. The broken one shook her head. I didn't know it would follow me. The woman stepped closer. You must ask the river for forgiveness, but even then you may never be free. The broken one looked away. I can't face the water, she said. Then live with the fire, the woman replied. I was desperate, the broken one cried. I had no choice. Her voice cracked like old wood. The woman stood still. The river doesn't care for excuses. The silence pressed down like stone. The truth had no mercy. The broken one covered her face. Her heart fell to the ground. The village whispered. The child from the river had returned. She was tall now, graceful, her smile soft like morning. Osinachi, they called her. She cleaned wounds. She held the hands of the sick. Crops grew, better where she walked. The river has blessed her, the people said. She is the one we needed. She moved from home to home. Her touch calmed crying children. Her words lifted tired elders. She carries something holy, an old man whispered, like the river lives inside her. Wherever she stepped, peace followed. She said little, but her silence healed. Far away, the broken one watched. Her hands trembled. Her skin had lost its glow. Her voice was thin. She's the one the river chose, she said bitterly. She saw joy in the girl's eyes and felt cold in her chest. Her mirror no longer showed beauty. Her bones ached with every breath. What have I done? She asked, but the wind did not answer. The older woman came again carrying food. She placed it down without speaking. The broken one stared at the ground. I didn't come to argue, the woman said, only to pray for you. The broken one looked up. Do you think there's still hope? The woman shook her head. Not from me. The river's judgment is final. You must live with your choices. She sat alone, legs crossed, eyes on the moving water. I had everything, she said. Gold, respect, beauty, and I threw it away. The village behind her was full of music. Children laughed. Osinachi's name was on every tongue. But the one who cast her out sat alone, her past rising like smoke. The river flowed gently, but it remembered. And so did she. The village gathered. Under the morning sun, their voices were low, their faces thoughtful. She had everything, one elder said. Beauty, wealth, a powerful husband. Another nodded slowly. But she wanted more. She let greed lead her, a younger voice whispered. And now she walks alone, forgotten. Heads shook, eyes turned toward the river. No one needed to say more. Her fall was a lesson none would forget. The river flowed as it always had, calm, silent, watching. An old woman spoke softly. The river remembers what you throw away. A child near her asked, even a baby? She nodded. Especially a baby. Another elder added, be careful what you abandon. It may return not with a blessing, but with judgment. The wind carried their words as if the river itself was listening. She stood before them no longer a child, no longer the one thrown away. Her voice was clear. Forgiveness is a strong thing, she said. It brings healing, but it cannot undo pain. The people listened. When you betray someone, even if they forgive, the scar stays. Her eyes scanned the faces around her. Actions echo. Long after the voice has gone silent, she continued. We must forgive. We must let go of anger. But we must also remember. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing peace while living with truth. An elder nodded. She speaks with wisdom beyond her years. Children leaned forward. Mothers whispered to their daughters. Something deep was being planted in every heart. She stepped forward, her voice stronger. Amanda cast me into the water. She thought I would disappear. But the river carried me to love, and now I am here. The people watched her with quiet respect. The things we throw away may come back, not always as weak, but sometimes as witnesses, as judges, as reminders. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was full of understanding. One voice rose from the back. Amanda's story is not just hers. It belongs to all of us. Another added, what we call worthless today may be our salvation tomorrow. Heads turned towards the river again. The message was clear. The water did not forget, and neither should they. The day ended with fewer words and deeper thoughts. Children asked questions. Elders gave quiet answers. The wind passed through the trees like a storyteller repeating a tale. And by the river, the lesson stood tall. What you abandon may one day rise, not in anger but as truth wrapped in light.